Wake up every morning with just the news. All the news and none of the noise.
Hey there, good morning and welcome to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield and glad you are here with us this morning. Well, a lot of news out of Arizona. We were giving you the live coverage here at Just the News and at Real America's Voice streaming live out of Arizona. There was a big push by Rudy Giuliani from the Trump legal team about this issue. Let's play some sound from the mayor and then we're going to bring our correspondent on the ground there from Arizona. Take a listen.
I'm going to ask you to try to implore the other members of your legislature to stand up to this. Do not be bullied. Do not be frightened. Your political career is worth losing if you can save the right to vote in America. In fact, I may get you the Constitution of the United States says that you, the legislature of Arizona, have the plenary power to regulate the selection of electors in a presidential election.
And that's Rudy Giuliani. And joining me from Arizona is Ben Berquam. He's our correspondent there for Real America's Voice in Arizona. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Carrie. Thanks for having me on.
So tell us, what was the view after this hearing? So this hearing went on for hours. They had a break for lunch in between. What was the sense? Because this was happening in a hotel room. It was not happening in an official chamber. Is there any possibility here that the legislature might make a move? I mean, yesterday, in real time, the Democratic Party of Arizona, they noted that the results were certified yesterday by Arizona. So is there any possibility of a change here when you have the governor, Governor Ducey himself, saying that he wants to proceed with the certification?
Well, based on the evidence, the legislators in the rooms absolutely want something to happen. Now, whether or not they can do that through a special session, which would have to be called by either two-thirds of the legislature or the governor himself, that's yet to be seen. But it clearly set up the path from what we're, kind of reading through the tea leaves on that the president's team wants to push this to the Supreme Court and then ultimately get the remedy from the Supreme Court. So, there's a possibility that they get the special session. They called for it. The director yesterday, or the main representative, said that he was calling for a special session. But in order to do that, there would have to be major political pressure put on Governor Ducey. Now, after sitting through it for 12 hours, the amount of evidence that they have just here in Arizona, it was overwhelming to me. I mean, the information that was presented statistically as well as factually it was incredible.
And when you said two-thirds, they could have a special session if it was two-thirds. What's the partisan makeup of the legislature?
It's just, so Republicans control just over 50%. So it's a very small majority of Republican, but they would need 9 Democrats to come over and join them. And speaking to some of the legislators there, that's probably not going to happen. But again, that's one of the ways to get there, other than Governor Ducey calling for a special session himself.
And it doesn't seem like the governor is going to do that unless, do you think that the governor, was he watching? Was he paying attention? Do you think he was moved or convinced by any of the 12 hours?
I saw the video like many did where he elbow bumped the Secretary of State after signing it, and they were doing it cheerfully. And, the juxtaposition from being here and the anger that you heard in the crowd with the evidence as it was being presented, and then comparing that to the governor's office basically celebrating what most people here viewed as a fraud, it was, I don't know where the governor's at on this. Honestly, I don't know who's pulling the strings or who has political influence over him. But if he watched what was presented yesterday, I don't see how he couldn't. I don't see how he could, in good faith and good conscience, say there's no questions that I certify this. That this is a legal election, and that's what the people here were saying. We're not saying that it's. They're not saying that it's. It's finished. But you have to at least start the investigations.
Right. Well, and the president himself was retweeting about Republican governors, a person expressing frustration about a Republican governor in Georgia and also in Arizona. What about the counter argument here to say, well, you know, there's the rules are the rules, and whether it's this election or prior elections, why didn't we bring these questions up before? And if there was any fraud, there's no, evidence that it moved the needle substantially, that it, altered the outcome.
Well, to both of those points, the first one, absolutely. I mean, what was shown yesterday was there's been a clear change in the way elections have been done. If you follow the numbers, Bobby Pitton, his information showed that this has been happening since probably around 2008, where there's been clear election violations, clear election fraud. But to the second point, that was what was shown yesterday, that this is not just small amounts of fraud. This is large fraud in mass, to the points of hundreds of thousands of votes. I mean, the algorithm's showing that either the Democrats had to vote 130% for Joe Biden and negative 30% for President Trump, to the point where Bobby Pitton's analysis showed that there's up to 400,000 illegal votes in this state. Now, just as a small number, when you say it doesn't change the needle, just in Maricopa County alone, what was shown yesterday was 5,700 votes. At minimum, 5,700 votes were cast by people that don't live in Arizona, people that have moved out of Arizona and vote shopped decided to vote back in Arizona. 5,700 votes in Maricopa County alone. So there was ample evidence to show that the election was changed. The question is, how bad was it? And that's what needs to be investigated, and that can't be done without, giving the servers and the Dominion software and the ballots back to do full audits on, not just recounting, but full audits to verify. One of the biggest concerns, and what Mayor Giuliani brought up yesterday, was there were hundreds of thousands of ballots that were processed without a Republican observer, and the Republican observers that were there said they watched thousands of ballots where signatures didn't match being pushed through under penalty of perjury. We heard witness after witness saying they were told just to approve them, and they were saying, these are things where the signatures were clearly not matching, and so it's just compounding evidence that that again, sitting through it, you couldn't ignore it.
All right, Ben Berkwan, thank you for the view on the ground there in Arizona. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Stick with us. We'll be right back. good morning and welcome back to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield and so glad you're here with us. We have another guest here on the ground in Phoenix, Arizona. He is also an energy expert, but we're going to talk about the politics of what's happening in Arizona first. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And I should mention Dan Eberhardt is also the author of the book. We're going to put your book cover up called Switching Gears, the petroleum-powered electric car. So we'll get to the power and energy in a moment. But since you're there in Arizona, and you mentioned that you'd watched the hearings that just happened last week with the yesterday with the Arizona legislature. What's your read on Governor Ducey in Arizona? Do you think he's going to be swayed by the 12 hours that were presented yesterday?
I'm not sure if he's going to be swayed or not, and I've spent some time with the governor in the past, but I think that he's, very much a Republican, but also an Arizonan and an elected official that's trying to uphold what happened in the election. So I really think, like a lot of Republicans, he's in a bit of a pickle right now, but I think in the end he'll do the right thing.
And in terms of the right thing, what's your view on that? Is the right thing to proceed with the certification, or is it to ask for more evidence?
To maybe ask for a little bit more evidence, but ultimately to proceed with the certification.
Mm-hmm. So you think that the issues that were flagged yesterday were not enough to move the needle electorally?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issues presented, provide definitely a cause for concern, but really aren't going to ultimately change the outcome. And so we just as a country need to move, and as Arizonans need to move ahead and move on right now. Is my sense of where Arizona's at and the country is at.
Well, and speaking of moving ahead, we've got some sound here from Joe Biden talking about his future administration, that the GSA has turned over millions of dollars to allow for the transition. Let's listen to what Biden had to say on this issue of climate when he was naming John Kerry as his, quote, climate czar.
For the first time ever, the United States will have a full-time climate leader who participate in ministerial level meetings. And that's a fancy way of saying they'll have a seat at every table around the world. For the first time ever, there will be a principal on the National Security Council who can make sure climate change is on the agenda in the Situation Room. For the first time ever, we will have a presidential envoy on climate.
And John Kerry said that for him, he wants to elevate this issue. What's your reaction to John Kerry being named to this post, this climate czar post?
Well, I think it shows the weight and the purpose that the Biden administration is going to put into the climate and trying to be responsible stewards. I also expect the administration to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. But in the end, I think this is all signaling and window dressing to the coalitions that elected Biden. The problem is going to be it's going to push America further to the left, and it's really going to increase, ultimately, energy costs and regulatory costs, which are going to cost consumers more money at the end of the day. And that's the part of this. I don't think the administration and Biden and his team are finishing the sentence for the cost and the consequences of having a full-time climate czar and the signaling it sends. It ultimately is going to end up with, costing people more money. And I don't think that's what Americans, want in the end.
Well, it's interesting. We had a congressman on this program last week talking about fracking. He's from Pennsylvania, and he said that the investment that's required for fracking sometimes will take 10, 15 years out. In some cases, it takes a couple years to even decide if they want to proceed to make an investment. And he was saying, from his perspective, that Biden making these arguments is going to really deter investment because it requires a lot of long-term capital investment. What's your read on that?
Yeah, no. So I actually think, similarly to how Democratic administration is good for gun sales, I think that Joe Biden is actually going to be good for the oil and gas industry because all the regulatory talk, the climate talk, the anti-fracking talk is going to crowd out investment in the space. And so the folks that are in the space are going to get better returns on capital. Because the price of oil is actually going to go higher. So consumers will end up paying more, but it'll be better for investors in the industry in the long term. That's my take, which is a little bit novel and different maybe from the consensus view, but something that I'm putting real money behind and where I think we're going. On fracking, Joe Biden has been really on three sides of a two-sided issue, as best I can tell. So it'll be quite interesting to see what he ends up doing in his administration.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the rising cost of fuel or gas that might rise the cost to consumers, because that's what the congressman last week was talking about. He said that because lower and middle income Americans actually spend a larger proportion of their family budget on energy, they're going to be hit the most. So do you think this is something that, Democrats like to say that they are all for the lower and middle classes, but in the end, do you think this will end up hurting the lower and middle class families?
Oh, it definitely will end up hurting lower middle class families for the reasons you just said. But what's most interesting to me is I've always thought that this ban fracking is reaching out to people in a Democratic primary. It's an applause line in a Democratic primary. It's not something that somebody that's governing is going to want to do, because it really hurts the people in the middle socioeconomically, and the people a little bit further down the ladder that, like you said, spend a disproportionate amount of their income on fuel. What we've really got to do in America, I think, is work towards an all of the above strategy. By that I mean focusing on things that reduce the cost of energy, but at the same time focus on reducing the carbon footprint. I think the two can go hand in hand, and I think that just trying to be, quote, anti-oil and gas is a headline, not an actual policy.
And so what do you think is the way to do it, to both reduce the footprint but also be affordable?
Well, I think we've got to focus on having engines that are more refined and sip gasoline instead of drink gasoline. I think that's part of what we need to do. Another part of what we need to do is continue to push into these green energy objectives. But I think things like wind and solar and hydrogen-powered vehicles potentially in the future are steps that should be taken with the free market. I'm a big believer that we switched to the iPhone from the BlackBerry because it was better, because it was cooler, because it was more interesting and had more features, not because the government told us to. I don't think we should transition to cleaner energy because the government tells us to. I think it should be market forces of what consumers want and what consumers are willing to pay ultimately should decide, not government with top-down, California is going to be carbon neutral by X date, or, France is going to be carbon, have zero-emission vehicles by Y date. I don't think ultimately that's the solution that is the most effective and what people ultimately want.
Real quick, 30 seconds. What's the biggest takeaway from your book that you want viewers to get?
The biggest takeaway is switching the electrification of the vehicle industry is not a switch; it's a process. There's a lot of infrastructure needed, and every year the internal combustion engine is getting more and more efficient. And so I think it's a much more nuanced, much more balanced approach. And the book, I think, is very interesting for people that know a little bit about electric cars but want to know more and how it relates to the traditional car in terms of output, damage to the environment, and kind of my predictions as to what's coming forward.
What's your prediction for Tesla?
Well, I think, honestly, I think it's a bit overpriced at the moment, but I think that, Musk has really changed the industry. And what's really the most interesting to me is how he's forcing Ford and GM and Chrysler to move faster into electrification. That's what's most interesting to me.
All right, Dan Eberhardt, we appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Make sure to check out his book, Switching Gears, the Petroleum-Powered Electric Car. And stay with us here on Real America's Voice. We've got Nicholas Balassi. He's going to give us the latest on what to expect out of Congress. Can we expect there is going to be another stimulus? He'll tell us. Welcome back here to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield and glad you're here with us. So what is the latest out of Congress and what can we expect? Joining me is Nick Ballasy. He's a correspondent with Just the News. Morning, Nick.
Morning, Carrie.
So what can we expect? Do you think we're going to see a stimulus here during this lame duck session?
It's possible, but both sides still haven't come together on some sort of agreement for where they're going to go with the next stimulus package. And Biden is already preparing a massive package that he would try to convince the Democrats to pass and work with them to get done in January. So it remains to be seen if both sides right now will come together under President Trump and with the Treasury Secretary and both chambers of Congress to actually get something done. But they also have another battle that they're going through right now. They're trying to figure out the appropriations, the normal appropriations for the remaining continuing appropriations because they expire on December 11th. So Congress is going through that right now, those negotiations, also with the stimulus in the background. So there's a lot that needs to get done this month.
So in terms of the stimulus, I mean, Nancy Pelosi seemed that she didn't want to give Trump a victory before the election. Does she have more of an incentive now just to get it done to help people?
She has been holding fast. She's been saying for a long time now that there needs to be a massive package. They passed that $3 trillion HEROES Act. Then they updated it to $2 trillion, about $2.2 trillion. She's just been consistent on the fact that there needs to be another stimulus package. The debate is just the amount. So obviously she's in a better position to get a bigger package if it's under Biden. But right now in Congress, I think it's pretty much nothing has really changed in terms of the negotiations since June. I mean, they've been going back and forth about the size and the contents of the package, and there really isn't that much right now common ground. I think the sticking point still remains the state and local government funding, what level that should be. The Democrats want more than the Republicans do. And then there's also an issue with the stimulus checks going to undocumented immigrants who filed tax returns with tax ID numbers instead of Social Security numbers. Democrats want them to get a stimulus payment. Republicans don't. So those issues are still here, and they're not going away.
And what have you heard from the Republicans, maybe from the House Freedom Caucus or Mitch McConnell or just Senate Republicans, about the fiscal nature of our debt burden to say, look, we've already spent trillions of dollars, trillions upon trillions, maybe not passing a stimulus given the fact that we have a vaccine that looks to be very much locked and loaded and is going to be distributed, perhaps 20 million by the end of the year. What's the sense there?
That's a great question. There aren't that many fiscal hawks left in Washington, it seems. I mean, I've talked to some Republicans. I've talked to some moderate Democrats who normally really want to figure out ways to reduce federal spending. And they've all said in this environment, it's really hard to do that because people want stimulus. They want to feel, help in their lives during a pandemic. There are, of course, like you said, some members of the House Freedom Caucus who are always in support of trying to figure out ways to reduce the federal budget, but they're in the House, and the House is run by the Democrats. So when you move over to the Senate, a lot of times the Senate just continues the same level of appropriations year after year, or even raises spending when they are negotiating these budget deals, whether it's stimulus or appropriations. Normal appropriation. So from what I'm hearing, I don't think we'll be seeing cuts anytime soon, but budget hawks, the ones that are left, are warning about the deficit and the national debt because it's pretty much the size of the entire economy. It's almost there.
Now, depending on what happens, if it is a Biden plan next year, The Senate is obviously in the balance with 2 seats up for grabs, and that if both seats go to Democrats, Democrats will have a slim majority. Let's talk about the race there from what we've seen. We have a headline about the Secretary of State down there who has said that he's looking into allegations of fraud for an organization that one of the Democrats who's running, Mr. Warnock, being probed for voter fraud practices. This is a group that was founded by Stacey Abrams, who had run for governor down there, and they've registered, according to their website, almost 400,000 individuals from, quote, underrepresented communities to vote in Georgia. Do you think there's going to be any result from this investigation? Do you think that, number one, this will impact the Senate race, and number two, possibly change the outcome of the presidential race?
I think it's too early to tell about the kind of effect it could have on the Senate race. It looks like there's a lot that needs to be investigated. Both runoffs are coming fast, so any investigations would have to move along pretty quickly. But all eyes are on Georgia right now. I saw that there's almost 1 million absentee ballot requests for these 2 runoffs. So the control of the chamber, I mean, depends on these 2 races, and the level of fundraising is through the roof. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. The Republicans could keep their control of the Senate if they can win these races. We'll just have to see. But the level of registrations and the level of organizations involved in doing these registrations is through the roof. I saw the numbers like over 200. So there's a lot happening there. We got to definitely keep an eye on these investigations and keep an eye on the developments in Georgia.
And the president's, one of the lawyers who's been working with the Trump legal team down there in Georgia, Lynn Wood, he tweeted out, he made a statement and he said, hey, Republican voters, you should withhold your votes and your money in these Senate races until these Republicans, that are the incumbents, they should do more on the presidential front. Do you think that could suppress the turnout for Republicans?
That's a tough one. I'm not sure. I did see some stories about how Wall Street connected donors are staying out of these races up to this point, but it could shift. I mean, we could see more involvement. The level of money already being dumped into Georgia for these runoffs is pretty high. So I think we'll see more of that. And I think the turnout's going to be huge on both sides. I think the people in Georgia understand that these races will determine the outcome of the Senate. And the level of engagement overall with the historic amount of votes in the presidential election, I think, is a sign that people will be engaged in these races in Georgia. And I think people will turn out on both sides in pretty high numbers, or send in, of course, with the pandemic, send in absentee or mail-in ballots for these runoffs.
Well, and President Trump has said he plans this weekend to go down to Georgia and make a pitch there for Republicans to show up for David Perdue and for Kelly Loeffler, the Republicans there. So we'll see what sort of impact he might have on the race. Thank you so much, Nick Ballasy. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And coming up next, we're going to have a debate on the issue of African-American women in the U.S. Where are they heading? Are they heading more toward Republicans, or are they continuing to stay loyal to the Democratic Party? I've got a couple different guests on both sides. Stick with us. Duvalier Malone is going to be my first guest. Stay with us. welcome back here to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield and glad you're here with us. Joining me here back on the couch is Diwali Malone. He's the author of the book called Those Who Give a Damn, a Manual for Making a Difference. And we're going to talk about an op-ed that he wrote. Let's put the headline on screen. He looked at the role of African-American women in this election, and his thesis is that black women have shown us the way. We have to keep our foot on the gas. And he looked at progressive black female leaders like Vice President-elect Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams, and he says that the black women are poised to take this new era in American politics by storm. So, I guess the big question is for black women in America. There was growth and momentum in the direction toward President Trump. So they went from 4% to 8% for President Trump in 2020 compared to 2016. So there was some growth among the Republican Party, but overall it went very strongly among this voting group for Democrats. Why do you think they're so attracted to the Democratic Party?
I'll tell you this, Carrie, the Democratic Party has done a lot of work to provide a diverse pool of candidates. When we look at the presidential candidates, there were a very diverse pool of candidates that were running for president of the United States. We had, Kamala Harris, we had Cory Booker, we had Amy running there. So we had, two women on the stage. And so I think when we look at the Democratic Party, they've done a great job at just providing a sense of diversity. And I think we live in America now where people want to see themselves. And so I think so many people, whether black or white or Hispanic, they see themselves in a woman like Kamala Harris, someone like Stacey Abrams, who, ran for governor of the state of Georgia and was so involved. People see themselves in those women and they are attracted to that.
Do you think there's a double standard because Stacey Abrams never actually formally conceded that she lost to Brian Kemp? And a lot of Democrats are saying, oh, Donald Trump, how dare you not concede, when Stacey Abrams did the very same thing. Do you think there's a double standard in how the media treats Stacey Abrams versus Trump?
No, I think when we look at what happened in Georgia and we see this presidential election, voter suppression was so strong in Georgia during Stacey Abrams' race. When we look at how so many people were turned around in Georgia, the lines long to vote, etc., Stacey Abrams took that loss and she turned it into her triumph. When we look at how she registered more people to vote, how so many, even in her gubernatorial race, so many ballots were cast out because people were misinformed, etc. So I think what happened, Stacey Abrams, I honestly believe she won the governor's race, but because of voter suppression, we didn't make it across that line. But I think coming back now is a given proof of what hard work does, and I think Stacey Abrams should be credited for moving that state along to turning blue. And we saw the margins were very close in Georgia, so there's still some work to be done on both sides of the aisle. But I do believe that when we look at Stacey Abrams, she had every right not to concede, and Donald Trump, he has every right not to concede as well. Moving forward, we're still going to move forward with President-elect Biden and Senator, or now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris being the next President and Vice President of the United States come January 20th.
Well, and as we just reported, the Secretary of State in Georgia is actually investigating Stacey Abrams' organization for possible voter fraud that they potentially, according to the Secretary of State, were registering people fraudulently. What's your read on that? So,
we knew this was going to happen, Carrie. When we look at that, the Republicans are pulling every trick out of the bag. And I think when we look at that, they have every right to investigate. And let's see what the evidence is there, and let's wait to see what happens. They have every right to investigate. I think President Trump, those cases that he's putting out, he has every right to do it. As we see, they're not moving forward anywhere. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but I think it's a distraction off of the issues. I think we have to get back to the issues. The issue is that we are in a pandemic. Over 200,000 people have died because of COVID-19. COVID-19 is affecting our African American community at number rates. People are in line that have never been in line for food banks. Our economy, as it relates, is unbalanced, Carrie, as it relates to the rich and the poor in this country. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think we have to move forth and talk about the true work. We have student loans that needs to be addressed in this country. We have a housing crisis that mortgages, when this pandemic and people cannot no longer extend their mortgages, they're going to be affected by this, Carrie. So I think we have to move forth with the true issues that are affecting everyday citizens. And I think, to go back to your earlier point, that's why so many people are attracted to the Democratic Party, because they're speaking to the issues that are affecting everyday people. I mean, every day. As Kamala Harris said, those kitchen table issues, the Democratic Party is doing a great job at attracting and speaking to that.
Well, and certainly on the issues, it's very welcome on this program for Just the News to talk about and really be focused on the issues. But you mentioned on student debt, a lot of people who have said that the Biden administration, Joe Biden has said he wants to forgive student loans. A lot of people are really upset because they say, well, I did things by the book. I paid my loans off. Why should these other people who are coming after me get special treatment? Should I get a refund? Like, where do we draw the line?
So I think, Carrie, when we look, so many African Americans, I can speak as an African American boy raised in Mississippi in poverty, student loans was the only thing that I had. First generation college graduate, we don't have the wealth that so many other Americans have. And so I think when we look at this, I think it has to be very thought out. I think that this new administration should look at the data, look at the statistics, the demographics of those who are, in student loan debt, and come up with a common sense plan. I do believe that. But I think when we look at the wealth gap for so many Americans, I think student loan debt being forgiven will really relieve us.
We got to leave it right there. Thank you, Diwali. Thank you. Good morning and welcome back to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield. Well, my previous guest just talked about the state of African American women from a Democratic perspective, and joining me to give the other side is Cherie Murray. She's an African American Republican and executive director of Unite the Fight PAC. Good morning, Cherie.
Good morning, Carrie. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
So my previous guest, we talked about, it is true that President Trump did see growth among black women from 4% to 8%. So that's a 100% increase, but you're talking about a very small number to begin with. So overwhelmingly, the Democratic Party is doing much better with black women. Why is that?
Well, I think their grassroots outreach certainly is making the difference when it comes to their get out the vote operation. I do believe that the Republican Party can step up the game and get more into the local communities. And that's why local elections are so important. So this is the time as we close out the 2020 election cycle where we look ahead to 2021 here in New York specifically. We have the entire city council that's up for grabs. So we're looking at some 30 plus city council seats locally that are going to be vacant. So I think that local grassroots ground game is where the Democrats can continue to pull ahead of the Republicans.
And a lot of people are migrating and leaving New York, fleeing the city because of the pandemic, and they want to go somewhere where there's grass. I'm a transplant. I just left New York after almost 10 years. I love seeing grass when I look outside my window. How do you think that's going to shift things politically, this migration of people out of New York?
Well, I mean, from the governor on down, he's told conservatives to leave the state. So we're seeing it from the high taxes that are probably going to be coming down the pipeline with the possibility of a Biden administration. And I think it's really hurting the pocketbooks of hardworking New Yorkers. Everyday New Yorkers, they're feeling the pinch right now as we're coming out of this pandemic and the closing of the economy. And right now, we just need to reopen the economy so that we can get our small businesses back. We can get just our civility back, our livelihoods back. This is a detriment what's happening in the country right now, Carrie.
And Cherie, when you're talking with your fellow African-American women, and because you as a Republican, you are very much outnumbered, what do you say to critics, especially black women who say, hey, the Republican Party doesn't care about you, they are out of touch, they're racist? What's your responses to that? Oh, Cherie, I'm going to restate the question. Hopefully we still got you. I asked you, what's your response to black women who say, oh, you're a Republican, you're very much outnumbered, and they say, oh, the Republican Party, it's racist, the Republican Party only cares about the rich. What's your response to those critics and those claims?
Well, thank you. That's a very important question. And as I sit before you as a strong black Republican woman, I meet none of those markers. I'm not white, I'm not old, I'm not rich. And that's generally what the Democratic Party does when they come into local communities. They demonize the Republican Party. So we never really have a footing, never really have the opportunity to clinch races in the local cities and then taking that to the federal level. So I think it's very important for the Republican Party to really outline a ground game that can connect with black women. And also the nuclear family is something that's important to black women. So I think issues like the nuclear family, issues like the economy, issues like criminal justice reform, those are some of the things that black women can support. So I think the Republican Party just needs to articulate those policies so that they can garner that support.
And when it comes to, you keep saying connecting with grassroots, how specifically, what are the nuts and bolts of Republicans and how they can reach black women?
As a former state committee woman, I know firsthand what it entails to knock on doors, to register voters, to re-register voters the legal way. And we hear a lot now about election fraud and voter fraud. And this is where it happens. at the grassroots level. So being a state committee woman and going out and engaging the community and teaching them politics 101, what it is to be a county committee member, that position is a very important one that actually designates who your county chair is. And then from there, your county chair, along with the state committee members, they then vote on who they want to run for office. So it's a very basic equation as it relates to getting involved and getting to know who the players are so that we can have a more diverse array of people that represent the Republican Party and also candidates that are carrying the torch for the Republican Party.
And what is, real quick, Unite the Fight PAC?
Thank you, Carrie. Coming off of my congressional bid against AOC, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to launch Unite the Fight PAC, which is a super political action committee. And our mission basically is to support candidates, service-driven candidates with a mission to unite America. You can visit unitethefightpac.com for more information. And I encourage all of your viewers make a donation to Unite the Fight PAC, because that's how we help to support candidates like myself, candidates across the country. We have two very important races right now in Georgia, and we need Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue in Washington, D.C., so that they can provide a check and balance on the possibility of a Biden administration.
All right, Cherie Murray, we appreciate it. She's the executive director of Unite the Fight PAC. And stay with us. We'll be right back. More coming to you on Giving Tuesday. It's Giving Tuesday. I'll give you my message after this break. there, and welcome back to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield, and glad you're here with us. I want to close out the show. Today is Giving Tuesday. It is that day of philanthropy out of the year when people are thinking about how do they want to give back to the community, what causes do they support, and we hope that you will consider giving a donation here at Just the News to our work in journalism and truth-telling and making sure that stories are being told that you won't see elsewhere. You're not going to see them on other networks. You're not going to see them on other websites. And we hope that you will consider funding our honest journalism. We devote ourselves to publishing daily. This is our donate page. You can see, you can go to it. You can access this page just by going to our website on justthenews.com, and in the upper right corner you can hit that little red button to click donate, and this little handy form will pop up for you. You can decide how much you want to donate, 5, 10, 25, 50, or however much you have in your heart, and you feel like this is something that you want to support. This has been an incredible year for us. Our founder, John Solomon, we just started in February, so we are a startup, and if you've ever been around a startup, you know there's a lot of high octane, there's a lot of uncertainty, but a lot of breakthroughs, and we have certainly seen this when we've reported about this election cycle, we've reported about government accountability, we've called out corruption, and John Solomon, our founder, is legendary for rooting out corruption, and we hope you will consider this Giving Tuesday, find it in your heart to help support honest journalism, to shine a light, and to hold government accountable. It's so much more important heading to 2021 with the new government. Stay with us here at Real America's Voice.